woman, and oh, thank you for recording. Yes. I have gray, blue, green eyes, and I have flecks of gold in the middle, and I have middle-ish blonde hair with red accents in it. And I am coming to you from my bedroom in Vancouver, in the East Vancouver, on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations peoples. And I am an interdisciplinary performance artist. I am queer. I work in movement, video, sound. I'm also a mother of 2 little ones. I also recently had my degree through CIAT, and I am a current Shadbolt Fellow at SFU. I would also like to acknowledge that my current research is taking place on the unceded territories of the Tsawwassen, Union Bar, and Yale Nations in the Fraser Salt Marshes and Tidal Flats from Sturgeon Bay to Roberts Bank, Boundary Bay, and beyond. I would also like to acknowledge that my research is also being supported by SFU's Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. And I am so grateful for the support and also how my research is very emergent at this point. So it's really wonderful to be able to work with everybody in the department as I am developing things along the way. Now, before I get any further, I just wanted to acknowledge that if you have any pronouns, please add them in your bar if you'd like to. I go by she or they. Also, this is a pretty small and intimate space, which I'm so grateful for. So thank you so much for coming. And I would just like to remind everybody that it's a very inclusive space. So feel free at any point if you feel like saying something. I'm not in any way precious about things being in a certain order. So feel free to either add something in the chat, feel free to keep your camera on or off, whatever works for you. I'm very open to us just being able to work together today. And for our objectives for today, I was thinking of identifying some tools that we can use to make sound compositions. I'm hoping that we can participate in an interdisciplinary dialogue because each of us have such unique practices. And I'm also hoping that we can try something collaborative and also maybe, I have some resources that I'd like to share with you. So for future use, maybe they'll be useful for you. So I will start with a bit of an introduction, a little bit about sound and theory, because I think it's really important to ground the work that specifically that I'm doing, but also I think it's really important to think about it in a larger context. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some digital tools that I use for production. And also I'm going to share an optional project that we can work on. You can work on that individually, or we could work on it as a group. So since our group is so small, I'm wondering if you could do me the favor of collecting something in your space and just taking a minute just to grab something that you would consider that would make some type of sound and then come back. I'm going to go grab something from my kitchen, I think. So I'll give you 1 minute if that's okay to come back with that object. And then I think we're going to just take a moment just to introduce ourselves with each other. So if that's okay, I'm just going to leave just for a second and grab a sound object. Anything that you think that makes sound. Awesome. Has everybody had a minute to collect something? Yeah? Okay, awesome. Okay, well, first of all, I was hoping that we could introduce ourselves. So again, my name's prOphecy. I'll start. And I have collected a pitcher, which actually is used every single day in my home. We love to, especially at dinner time, my daughter likes to pour everybody a glass of water. Half the time it gets spilled all over the table by the end of the meal, but hey, it's a good opportunity. And I love the way that this object sounds. It's kind of clinky, and every time it fills with water, it kind of changes the way that the sound of this object sounds. And so that's my object. And would anybody else like to share who they are, where they're coming from in the world, and what object they have?
I can go ahead. Hi, everyone. My name is Amin, pronouns she, her. I'm tuning in from South Vancouver, and I have actually a glass, water glass, so
Great.
that's my sound.
Awesome. Water seems to be the item of choice right now.
I can go next. My name is Shi. I'm a second-year PhD student at the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies Department at SFU. And I'm joining from Burnaby. Yeah, I never really learned how to say the First Nations name in the Burnaby. I think it's Hakumanum and Squamish nations. And my object is it's a bowl made from, I think, bone china. So it has a really very nice crisp. I don't know if you can hear it well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Would anybody else like to pipe in? It's okay if you don't want to either. That's okay. Oh, you're on mute there. Thank you.
I'm unsure what the sound is for.
Oh, great question. I was just thinking of some kind of icebreaker at this point, just something just to...
Oh, okay.
More or less.
Okay, my name is Renee. I'm from Michigan, and I have a book.
Oh, great. The book is great. Thank you. I actually really like the deep tone of that when you were banging it.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
It does. It feels hefty. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. And would anybody else like to go next? Is it Meta?
Yeah. I'm Meta, she, her. I'm here in Vancouver. And today's item is a Ventolin inhaler with a spacer. And it's kind of interesting how it makes this, I don't know, this just I don't know if the microphone's picking that up very well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot of different sounds. And yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. I don't think I'm missing anybody. I think that's our beautiful little group, right? I think that's it for us. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing something about yourself. It's really nice to meet everybody. And so something I was thinking about for today was to, let's see here. So we've gone through our objectives, getting to know each other just a little bit. I just wanted to share, for my practice, I've been making, so far over the last couple months, I've been making a body of work called Intertidal Compositions for the Fraser Lowlands. And this work is a multimedia production thus far. It invokes ideas of feminist stewardship through the practice of what I call embodied carriance. It's a term I'm working on right now that represents this notion of carrying or lifting and also holding space. And I really feel that it also is really invoking a lot of ideas of also collaboration with the environment, collaboration with bodies and space. And it's a bit of a process that is something that I've been developing through my thesis research earlier, and now that I'm carrying forward in my Shadbolt work. Thus far, the work is definitely collaboratively shaped. It's part of a larger research agenda that focuses on ecological imperatives using a variety of research creation processes, visual and sonic embodied ways of thinking. And so when I'm thinking about research creation in different parts of the world, it's known as arts practice, or research in practice. So there's a bunch of different ways of thinking about research creation, but in Canada, we reference it as research creation for any type of art and creation that work together. This idea also builds on Springay and Truman's ideas that also thinking about walking practices and thinking about a framework which uses this notion that I'm developing right now called embodied cariance, and this notion of nomadic practices of place and listening, and also practices of attunement. And when I think about attunement, I think about sound, I think about body, I think about our landscape and the environment we're in. So that's another reason when I was thinking of an object, thinking of that something's in our surrounding that we may take for granted, but it every day creates a type of sound. So when I'm thinking about this framework, I'm also thinking about ways of generating this notion of, again, embodied cariance. And so thinking about this idea, I've been thinking about both the material and the fleshy voice as this expressive notion that conveys meaning and also identifies this notion of subjectivity. So although there's a natural tendency to think of the expressive voice as a sole or primary marker to identify our own individuality, I've been thinking about sounds also as having this uniqueness that has a specific, like this has a very specific sound compared to the book, for example, or the item that you showed, Meta. I think each of these have a materiality that is very clearly their own. And also thinking about this notion of the voice, it's also helping us think about identity. Each of us has a very distinct voice and rhythm and how we speak and how we move in the world. And this also becomes a sense of identifying who we are and the characteristics of who we become. So thinking about this sense of sound too, it's hard not to go back to some of the theoretical framework that has brought up a lot of sound practices in recent years. This idea of considering this notion of sensorial and approaches to sound design, for example. For today, I was thinking of talking a little bit about this notion of the sonic turn. I was thinking about voice and sound and this materiality and how they're all connected. So in the 1860s, Scott Martinville captured the first 10-second recording of a human voice using what he termed a photo autograph. And this idea of this instrument, which is so fascinating to me, is it was actually a lullaby. And I love this notion that it's a 10-second item, and the sound was actually captured on paper. And in this sense, sound imbues this notion of a conceptual presence, and it's a vibration and a virtual emotion, but it's also disembodied when you put it into something like this. It's not actually, we don't actually see the physical body, but this instrument captured this lullaby from the 1860s. I find that absolutely just remarkable. Just the fact that we can record any sounds, I think, is absolutely remarkable. And this notion that sound lives well beyond its years. So when we record something, it lives beyond our body, but it also lives in different ways. It also takes on its own presence and its own body, if you will, as it transfers and moves throughout different systems, technologies, and also in a sense, from a recording from the 1860s, there's nobody alive from that time right now that actually would actually be part of that sound. So thinking about the power of recorded sounds, it makes me think about the past. It makes me think about the lifespan of a sound. And so this is something I've also been thinking a lot about as I've been starting to record sounds in 3 different locations in the Fraser Lowlands. Each of the locations is very different. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I really love this notion that sound just lives beyond. And so at the beginning, I was playing some sounds for some birds that I have recorded in the bird sanctuary, which is near Delta. And the other idea of thinking about the voice is also the sense of a pathway. And because we're an audience that listens to a sound, there's also the sense of a visual, also an auditory presence, but it also leaves an impression. And when I think about this notion of sound, I get kind of obsessed thinking about recordings in general and this notion of playing back or playback, where we repeatedly can listen to a sound again and again. It's actually, it's to me, it's like a juicy meal. I get to listen to it again and again, or choose not to listen to something. So I think that's really a powerful aspect of sound that I don't think a lot of people talk a lot about, is this notion that I think now we're really caught up. We have agency to choose to turn off sounds or turn them on, but often we don't either, because we're living in a constant, for example, where I am right now, I'm right across from a very large construction site. And today is the day that they've decided to block the road. They have gigantic cranes and they're picking up these sections of dirt and other items that are going to be going onto the rooftop of this piece that they're building. And so yesterday was very calm. You could hear birds on the street. You could see people walking. And today it's like, so again, there's moments where we can turn off sounds and other moments where we're just enveloped in them. They're all around us. But I do love this notion of this idea of being able to play back something. And I've been trying to seek to understand this notion of why I'm so obsessed about it. But I think there's like this notion of a visual thing that seems relevant to my life. And also when I think about it, I think about consciousness and the things that sometimes, even when I'm sleeping, I'm aware of certain sounds, and other things I just tune out. So I think our bodies are pretty powerful in that notion. Now, Feaster argues that contemporary listeners are distracted with continuous playback, and that they miss the simplicity of hearing a sound through paper means, and only for a blip of time. So when we think about being distracted by sounds, I mean, I'm coming to you right now on a digital technology, on a computer. I think in some ways it's hard not to be distracted just from the technology itself, but it's hard sometimes to focus with our eyes. Sometimes listening also means turning off your other senses as much as you can so that you can be as present. But I think it's really a difficult thing unless you're in, say, one of those sensory tanks or something else where you can isolate sounds. It's really difficult. And I think about this idea a lot because I think about sounds being alive. They're virtual, they have their own sensibilities. And in a way, I actually argue that sounds have an agency and a power to exist both materially and in immaterial forms. And in a sense, that sound that I was talking about that was recorded in the 1860s, that sound lives way longer than when it was first recorded for that first 10 seconds. And I feel like that's just such an exciting idea that recorded voices can breathe in other forms. And I know from a couple of you that some of you are working in different mediums. I've been thinking a lot about podcasting recently too, and different types of ways of thinking about sound in cinema. I've been thinking about sound in performance, live performance. I've also been thinking a lot about the origins of the first recorded sound. So that's why I'm obsessed with this notion of thinking about playback, because I just think it's absolutely phenomenal that we could do that. Jean-Luc Nancy writes about the power of voices being disembodied and having a presence that moves and breathes beyond a location. I think about this sense of distance from sounds as well, that we're right now, I have a computer that is beaming up to the sky to then beam back down to you. But if you think about these sounds, I love this notion that they live and breathe beyond just my body as well, the sounds that come through this experiment, if you will. And when I think about creative practices, I think about notions of being very sound oriented. I think a lot of things like a photograph or a picture or a painting, they're very visual, but a lot of sonic works, they can convey and emote all different types of things that make you think about all different types of experiences. And I'm also interested in this notion of this relationship with place and sight. And so the work that I've been doing for the Shadbolt thus far has really been making me think about memory. It's been making me think about my relation to specific locations, different types of histories, but also been making me think a lot about technology. And I think often I take technology very granted in my life and in my practice, but I think it's something that the more time that I spend being away from different types of technology, I realize actually how much I take them for granted. So I've also been thinking a lot about contemporary artists that have investigated this notion of resonance and stillness of sound, and thinking about different forms of technological, cultural, and methodological engagements and different types of encounters. This phenomenon is also called the sonic turn. So we are in this time right now where we're really thinking about sound. It's getting louder and louder. There's a global hum, for example, that different people around the world talk about different times of the day that they hear certain sounds. And thinking about this cultural marker as also a perceptual driver, I feel like we are starting to understand that sound is our contemporary reality. Sound affects and is part of our everyday. And this turn has also opened up spaces for artists, designers, scientists, scholars, theorists, and experimenters to think about sound and auditory ways that we can stimulate and also push research beyond our bodies, and thinking about systems in new and emergent ways. For instance, I've been thinking a lot about spatial tools that extend our hearing. I've been like these headphones, for example. I love the fact that I can plug in a headphone to be able to actually isolate and hear the sounds and be able to talk to each of you more intimately than hearing the sounds that are around me right now on the street, which are just absolutely crazy. And I've been thinking about this notion too of sound being able to transform and transcend our bodies, as I was mentioning before. I feel like this gives us a lot of agency and a lot more freedom for creativity. And I've also been thinking a lot about this notion of what R. Murray Schafer talked about as this term, the soundscape. Now, soundscape, again, it was developed in the 1960s and 70s, but this is not a new phenomenon. Soundscapes have been around us for however long humans have been around, and animals, etc. But Schafer brought this idea of identifying the acoustic and the ethical best practices of mediating noise pollution. And I think that this is especially relevant today. There are artists working all around the world thinking about ways of mitigating and thinking about the landscapes that we're around, and also the choices of what sounds we are listening to, the sounds that we are not listening to, and isolating different variations in between. It feels like a long time ago when we were able to sit in a restaurant with others. So I really look forward to that. But I also know that, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but sometimes you can be in a space and it's just so loud. And other times where it's super quiet and you can hear something, water being poured. I feel like there's a lot of variations in between, but I'm hoping that some of the things that will come out of this pandemic is a little bit more understanding of intimate spaces and ways to kind of think about sound in general. But when I think about this gaggle of people here that I have this image of, you can see Hildegard Westerkamp in the middle there. She developed this notion of also sound walking, which is also something that I've been thinking a lot about in the research I've been working on. But all of the Schafer's colleagues, there's Barry Truax, which has been very foundational for SFU and sound studies. There's also Bruce Davis, Peter Hoos, and they all work together on a collaboration to develop our ecological understanding and perspectives on impacts of sound in the world. So collectively, I think it's still really important to think about these artists, especially since they are leaving a legacy that a lot of us are picking up. I know in my own research, I have a lot to owe to the development, for example, of extending sounds. It's called granular synthesis, like thinking about how you divide up sounds. This, again, I just want to give a little nod to some of this legacy. But I also want to acknowledge that soundscape studies is something that has been done in Indigenous work, has been done in all different types of practices. And it's not just the white guy, it's not just the patriarchal standard argument, if you will. I think it's really important to identify that there is a large visible minority that has been ignored in a lot of soundscape studies. And so I think right now, what I'm excited about, there are a couple of artists. Dylan Robinson, for example, has a wonderful book out right now called Hungry Listening. If anybody's interested in reading a fantastic book that really brings a lot of different Indigenous and also artistic and creative ways of thinking about sound. And what I love about Dylan Robinson's work is the notion that sound it has been all around us and been acknowledged in different ways throughout different practices and cultures. And so I think that's a really important element to bring up. And also it's a conversation that is developing, and especially in Canada, where soundscape studies have a large legacy, especially through SFU, as being some of the leading voices that also brought soundscape to the fore. So for making compositions, I'm just wondering, from everybody's experience here, I'd love to hear more about each of your practices, because I'm just going to frame from where I'm coming from when I think about sound. I work very interdisciplinary. To me, sound seems to be something that, whether it's a moving image or it's another type of composition I'm making, sound seems to always kind of be lifted up in the work versus being buried. Often it's not just the visuals that are the thing that are carrying the work, it's actually the sound. And often it may seem very quiet, but it's the thing that I feel moves things forward. So I was just wondering who has recorded a soundtrack before, and if so, what kind? And I'm wondering if anybody, you can feel free to unmute yourselves or add something in the chat, whatever makes you feel comfortable. I'm just curious to know who has recorded something in the past before.
Yeah, I can go first.
Okay, perfect.
Actually, I love recording stuff to prOphecy. You know, just random things, like when someone's talking, I mean, you know, my friend or family member is talking, then sometimes, because I live alone, so it's a way for me to like be close to someone I love just by playing their voice, you know. But also because I'm doing research on Tai Chi, sometimes I record a class session, just the sound. Because I think there's something, you know, when we talk about the sound that, I mean, like for me, I guess I'm speaking from my own experience, because when I record like a video, I get distracted by the visual image. But when I record the sound, I can really focus on the content that's being delivered, and really try to understand and process it at a different level. And maybe what you were talking about, like muting my visual sense and really listening my audio sense, and it activates a different part in my brain. I don't know if it there's any back into that. Yeah, so do I have to answer all the questions, or?
No, not at all. I just putting them up there just kind of as food for thought here. Because when I think about practices, we all, in our own way, we all have a different type of sound practice. And I think everybody does actually have a sound practice, whether it's how you shape your personal environment, how you, some people record things with their phones. Some people record things with larger tools. Some people want to just hear a live performance of a band, or I just feel like there's a lot of different ways that we engage with sound. When I think about recording something, it's very unique to each of our practices and how we do that. whether it's like recording a video. And when you record a video, often the sound is recorded alongside, and sometimes it just doesn't get carried to the fore. Sometimes it's just that, again, that visual that we see. But I think we have different responses and different ways of engaging things. And I was just curious because it's something that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and just suggest some things potentially, if you haven't recorded anything, some ways that I mitigate how I record things. Would anybody else like to pipe in with any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, sure. The first time I tried to, I turned my video off instead of my sound on. So just for a bit of background of my technical abilities there.
Perfect.
I haven't done it for a long time, but I used to do a lot of kind of soundscape recordings, I think is what you'd call it. Especially when I lived in the UK, going on the tube there, like the underground SkyTrain. And just it's like these long, endless, echoey chambers underground with so many people in there. So there's just the sound of, people murmuring and people maybe dropping stuff or picking things up, or like, oh, excuse me, you go that way, you go ahead. And then there'd be buskers in there as well. So you'd hear this warped, echoey, reverby sound coming up to it and then up to it. And like, it's still not a very good quality of sound because of the way I was recording it. And that's what I was trying to do, and then going away from it again, the whole thing in reverse. And I don't know, I really loved that. It was quite
did it give you comfort? Did you listen to the recordings afterward, after you had made them? Because some people I find this fascinating, by the way. Some people just make recordings just to make a recording as almost a document of that time, and they just kind of archive it. Some people like to listen back again and again. Some people take it to layer on to something else. Everybody has different ways that they engage. It's almost like how some of us like to read books online. Some people like to read the physical book. I feel like it's such a different thing. But as you were mentioning earlier about this notion of like kind of comfort in your home, if the family or others are not there, it's kind of almost a comfort to listen to something when somebody, you can almost get an essence of what was happening then. But I love that notion of like going through the tubes and like, just like listening to that sound, because it's almost very methodical and meditative almost.
Totally. Yeah.
I love that. Would anybody else like to pipe in with anything? Oh, looks like we lost our guest. Okay, so something else I've been thinking about for recording was thinking about, in general, recording sounds. And one of the things that I was thinking about for recording is I've been doing a bunch of different things. I'd love to share with you what I do, because for me, I work on the go, and each of us has very different practices. And what I was thinking was something that's really, really useful for me is I kind of like to use things on the go in a way that, I don't know, it doesn't have to be a long setup. It can be something that's done really fast. So I use a laptop, but I usually keep that at home. I use an iPhone. You can use any type of smartphone that you have. I use this little iPhone. I use a little tiny device, which I love to use. And I don't know if anybody has one of these, but I have a little recorder. It's called a Shure MV88. And what it does is it's great because it plugs into my phone, which I love, like this. And I can, it's awesome. And it's great so that it can it has different types of directions. And it's a condenser microphone. So sounds kind of are a little bit more honed in. Because I find even if I do a voice memo, for example, often I will just record something. You kind of lose some of the directional sound. So I've been finding this very useful. What's great is I actually have been using this in the landscape a lot. And so what it does is I I know these are just like the big tools you could get, but it's like the mini version, if you will, because this to me is the most important thing, is be able to do things in my pocket. So it has this, so it's like a wind jammer, which is fantastic, especially on really, really windy days. So again, it's great. You can use this for different types of things. I also use a tripod, which I find really, really handy. I'm sure like now that the pandemic has been going on and on, everybody's been using more and more mobile tools and ways of doing things. But what I've been finding is it's nice to have something stationary when you're recording, especially if you do have your phone. I always turn everything to airplane so that you don't get bumped or sound doesn't stop. But I always put things like on a tripod and then like set it up. I find that really, really useful. And something that I also use is, it's an app. You can get different apps that just kind of allow for the sound to be isolated on the microphone. I find that really useful. So I don't know if anybody is actually using any different microphones other than the ones they're using with, are you like, what kind of devices are you recording with right now?
Like for me, I'm just using my smartphone, but I've been looking for all this, like the microphones and tripod, for a long time. I just couldn't really decide. Because like you said, like if we can, separate the tracks, it's really, really, really useful, because often there's a lot of background noise, and I do a lot of reviews in my work editor. So sometimes I can't even hear what the person's saying when I'm trying to transcribe the conversation. So this, I'm going to try out Motive. I've heard of, and also the Windjammer.
Yeah, I find they're both really useful.
Are we looking at for this too, like the microphone and the Windjammer?
Well, they're really quite affordable. I think that this was like under $100. Like in the grand scheme of things, nothing's ever cheap. But at the, instead of getting something that's, like $300 or $400 or $500, to me, this was a really nice,
brilliant,
kind of a little bit more accessible in that sense. Another thing I've been thinking about is like laptops in general. It just depends on what you're using, but I also think like smartphones obviously have their own, there's people sometimes use Zoom, like the actual, like there's different devices you can use. I just found this is just the easiest for me, because then I can also just send it right away so that it doesn't get lost in the queue. And I usually will just airdrop it to my laptop once I've had the sound, so I don't actually have to plug anything in. Just makes things really fast and easy, especially if, again, you have 10 minutes to work on things, which is often the case for me. They're very short bursts. Again, so yeah, I would just suggest something, especially if you're doing interviews and things like for transcribing, something that's more direct, versus you can also get microphones that are more for room sounds. It just depends. You can kind of look into see what works for you. This has been great for me, because usually I just bump up like the volume on things. Another thing sounds like, I've also just been recently working with this set of gear. Let me just pull it up. I've been working with this a couple of times, and I actually kind of got my own podcasting microphone, because I do a radio show as well. And this is great for things like that. But sometimes, again, it's about plugging a whole bunch of things in. And I find that I actually use this more than I do anything else, more often than anything else, which is actually kind of amazing when you think about it. Because again, it's nice that I have a family. So often it's about trying to find a quiet space in the home, even for 5 minutes to do something. Or if I'm out in the landscape, I find this is actually a lot easier than trying to set up something else with my laptop and figure out things. Now, I'm just curious about editing programs. What if you're using any of them at all at this point? No. Okay.
Really using the software, because I don't have an iPhone. I use Google Pixel, so I just use the whatever program that built in.
Great. Okay. Well, if I could recommend something right off the bat just as a wonderful entry. And I use this. This is the editing program I use. I mean, I could use a lot more advanced programs like Pro Tools and other things, but I actually use Audacity. If you have a chance, it's open source, it's free, it's awesome. I would download it on your laptop, and it's so easy to use. Like, it's really straightforward. And I'm going to share a link with you in just a moment because I want to share with you some things. Let me just grab the link. I'm going to stop my share for just a moment. And something I was, let's see here. Bear with me for just a second. Let's get the link for this. All right. All right, this should work. I'm going to put this in the chat. It's not in this meeting. Okay, not Renee. All right, let's see here. There we go. How's this? Now, if everybody can click on that link, I'm not sure if you'll be able to, but I've put together a list of different resources and also things that we can think about. There's some resources there. There's a couple of links for Audacity and also some helpful things for editing. I've found that it's actually really great to just throw a sound into a basic program like that and just play around with it, even for 5 minutes. So what I've done is I've given you guys a couple of samples of sounds too, like the birds that we were listening to at the very beginning. And let me just close this here. I'm not sure if everybody's had a chance to open up that link yet.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. I'm just gonna share my screen again, just so that it will be clear for anybody else that's also watching this later. Okay, so I love the fact that we can do something like this, that there's a platform that is so visual as well. So I love Padlet. Okay, so what I was thinking was for resources, for example, Audacity, if you click on the link, you can download the program. It's really straightforward to use. And also something I've been playing around, if you want to get a little bit more up, there's this program called Koala, if anybody's tried it. It's a sampler. It's something that I've just started to play with. And it's really fun. You can download it on your phone, but you can also download it on your laptop. And it makes all these really, really cool sounds. And you can play with sequences, etc. But what I'd recommend for just starting out is actually just downloading Audacity. And the great thing about Audacity is I'm just going to open up actually an Audacity window right now so we can edit something together. Let's see here. Bear with me for just a second. Lots of different things. Okay. All right, let's see here. Audacity, come on up for me, please. Love technology. So nobody's used Audacity before. Okay, I'm so excited. Awesome. I wish we had more time, but we can take more time if you'd like. So Audacity, what's great about it is, again, you can drop any sound file. It just has to be an MP3 or a WAV. Often when you do a sound file from this is like the first hurdle. When you download a sound from your phone or any other type of device, often it's just in an MP4 format. And you can get something just like, it's called a file converter. I use something called Switch. Again, it's just Switch, like a switch that you would do on the wall. And it's free. Again, it's open source. And all you do is you drag that download of the MP4 and you drag it in there and it converts it right away to an MP3 or a WAV. I then take that file and I'll drop it into Audacity. So now I'm going to just pull up, see here. What do we have bird-wise? Let's see. Bird. I'm going to close this for a second and stop my share and pull up my file. Because what's great about Audacity is it has the potential to be used by everybody readily, right away, and you can make a composition in like 5 minutes, which is fantastic. You can layer lots and lots of different sounds together as well. Let's see here. I have
Do you know if Audacity is more for Apple or Mac?
You know what? It's both. It's both for both platforms.
Somehow it's not showing up on my app when I try to download it on my phone.
Oh, on your phone. Do you have a laptop?
Yeah, I do. It's better on the laptop.
Yeah, I would recommend doing the laptop for Audacity. I would recommend, like from my experience, I would recommend doing all your basic recording on your phone and then taking it. And if you want to, for example, with Audacity, you can like make sounds like bigger. You can layer things. You could do some of that basic editing on your phone, but I'd really recommend using something like this because also you're going to want to save variations on the sounds.
Got it.
I'm going to share my screen again now that I've got Audacity open. See here. Okay, so you can see that right now, right? So I have put in the bird sounds that I had before. And Meta, I'm not sure what programs you've used in the past for editing. Some people use GarageBand. It's like whatever you have available, but I actually find Audacity, like it just seems to be, to me, the most straightforward. I love the fact that it's open source as well and it's free. But if you have GarageBand, go for it. Like I'm not against any editing program. Any program that gets you making sound is fantastic. So for example, just thinking about like we could play the sound. There's the birds. You could play around with, let's just move this over a little here. So you can see this a little bit better. So you can play around with, for example, like how loud something is. So there's something called gain right here. So you're going to notice it's a lot louder in a second.
I actually can't hear your birds at all.
Oh, okay, good. Let's see here. Make sure you can actually hear what I'm saying then. Stop. Share screen.
Yeah, I could hear the second time, not the first time, but the second time when you amp up the volume, I could hear it.
Okay, great. Okay, if that's the case, I'll try and bump it up even more, Meta, so you can hear. Let's see here. So this is a volume here. I'll try and do that as loud as I can. So bear with me if it's too loud. Okay. So again, you could play with that and you could actually play with the volume level of things. So you can barely hear things. But what I was going to say is you can layer lots of different sounds. You can do layer upon layer. So each of these here, it could just be one level of sound. So if you wanted to throw in this sound again, see here, let's add in this one. So I can drop in another sound. It's going to import a file. So I've already transferred so these all came off my phone. Again, I went through the basic program. It was an MP4. What I did is I put it through this program called Switch. It makes it really, really fast conversion. You take the MP3 and you transfer it into this file and boom, you just kind of drag and drop them in and you can start layering them. So this is a lot of the sound compositions I'm making. So you can see how different these two sounds are. You can name them at the top. Here you can change the name. So it doesn't get complicated. You could say, sound from my bathroom, sound from my bedroom, sound of Bob talking, whatever it is that you want to say. And then what's great about it is you can actually change the volume of each of the sounds. You can cut out certain sounds. So let's say I don't want any of that. I also could fade things out. So there's different effects that you can use to amplify, fade out, fade in, reverb, stretching things. Again, there's so many different ways that you could use this program. But I wanted to show you this because for me, if you're making any type of soundtrack for video, I know both of your practices very well in some ways now, that this would be a really useful tool. So I'd really recommend using this and get yourself a really small or easy, there's a lot of, you can get a lot of microphones that actually fit and plug into a phone, and you don't even need to do that. If you're on a more of a budget, just use your phone and you can still play with the loudness. You can play with all these different things just from a basic audio file. So you don't have to get too complicated. In fact, I've recorded a lot of sets from performances straight just from my phone like this without even an extra microphone. But if you're doing a interview or something else, I'd highly recommend having something that's more directional. So I'm going to stop that there. But yeah, I'm just excited that both of you would like to try this. To me, there's like lots of opportunity. So what I did is in our little Padlet there, what I did is I actually added a couple of sounds. It says, it's the last box and it says sound samples. I don't know if anybody can see that. I don't know if you want me to direct you to where that is. Let's see here, sharing my screen. A portion of my screen. And we're just going to finish the workshop in just a minute, but I wanted just to direct you to this because I think it would be really cool if you wanted to work on something. I'd be happy to give some feedback along the way. So I've put a little section here in the Padlet that I shared with you for sound samples. And what I've done is I've put 3 sounds. There's a bird, there's a train, and there's another sound that are from specific locations that I've been recording from. And there's an optional project here if you'd like, where you can do a 1-minute composition from that, and you can upload it here if you'd like. And I'm happy to, in the future, if you'd like, to talk a little bit more with you about ways that you could edit, or don't just use it as an exercise for yourself to even just play with Audacity just for the first time if you'd like. So I think I'm just going to leave it there. And I just wanted to, are there any questions right now?
Yeah, sorry if you mentioned this, but so when you're recording with your phone, with the Windjammer on your phone, what app do you use on your phone to record that?
I'm using so I use both the voice memo app, but I also use a Motiv. It's MOTIV. Yeah, and that's the one that I'm using for this one.
And okay, and is that better than the voice memo one?
I do. I find it's better. Let me just open it up for you and hopefully we can share it through the screen here. What I find better about it is actually the fact that you have an ability to play with the camera. So for example, let me just show you. Just plug this in. Listens more when you actually do things like this. Yeah, you can basically, what it does is you can kind of change the way that the direction of the microphone is. You can't really see it as much here. It's just you're gonna keep getting the lights from my my bar here. But what you can do is you can actually like use your fingers and you can kind of hone in on how large you want the microphone depth to be. And that's really useful, especially if you're recording conversations or you're in a room, or let's say you're in a larger space. But for general recordings, the voice memo still works great. It's just a matter of bumping up the volume and the gain on the Audacity once you actually do it in an editing program after. But I really highly recommend playing with this because it's changed my sound practice. Just being, I feel like I'm a very experimental person in general, and no matter what medium I'm working in. But what I've found is it's been really useful for me just to be able to capture a little deeper sounds and something that can be especially used in different videos that I'm working on. And Often what I'll do is I'll actually take the sound from the video that I'm working on and I layer that in the Audacity as well. And sometimes I'll just turn the volume on that down and then add other sounds in as well. So if you want to play around, you can do that in any of the movie editing programs that you're both working in. But it's nice to have that control and Audacity just to begin with. So you can play around with the sounds and change things and fade them out, fade them in, and then throw that file into the movie editing program afterwards. I find it gives you a little more freedom and also an opportunity to make things even more cinematic if that's what you'd like to do. So yeah, so those are some of the things that I was thinking about for today, just kind of covering some of the basics, but also I wanted to give a little bit of sense of where I'm coming from, thinking about the Fraser Lowlands. I'm in the process right now of recording an archive of sounds. So I'm trying to record 100 sounds together from each of the 3 locations that I've chosen. And then I'm going to start building and making compositions from them in the next couple months. And so that's where I'm at. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. And if there's any other questions.
I have one last question, prOphecy. Yeah. Thank you so much. I've been learning a lot this 1 hour. My last is, how do you disseminate like your work? I mean, that's such a big question, but for example, this sound composition, maybe Padlet is one of your ways. I just learned today too. So
thank you. Well, I find, okay, so what I shared here with the Padlet, what I love about this system is it's just a nice way of organizing things, like even for yourself, it's kind of like folders. It's a great way of sharing if you're collaborating on a work with somebody. So a lot of the work I've been doing has been collaborative. So, so what I'll do is I'll either share files that have things I've recorded, and then we send files back and forth to each other once we've worked on things. But as far as dissemination, oh boy, all over the place. A lot of the, I've been working so interdisciplinary that I've been finding that the sound seems to still be at the heart of each of the works that I'm making. And so I've been disseminating it in different conferences. I've been, some pieces have been shown in 15 to 18 sound exhibitions where there's like 18 different speakers of some of the compositions I've made. And so for example, in the program I just showed with you there, Audacity, you can actually do it so that you make 18 different parts of the composition. And then you just export them as separate files. So for example, if you want to make a work that is shown that way, sometimes I've been using it again as just, I've been working on like 3 different soundtracks that then I layer on top of different videos I'm working on. So it's kind of, and also I've recorded sound albums on here. So any of the sound works that any of the bands that I've been part of, this is how I record my vocals. So it's really up to you on how you want to use it. But I would really recommend just playing around, because I really feel like it kind of opens up a lot of doors to try thinking about sound in different ways in your practices. Because often it gets overlooked. It's an aspect that you're like, oh, I'd like to work on that, but I'll send that to somebody else. It's kind of nice to have the agency to work on it yourself and play around with it. So yeah, so I've been trying it in a lot of different ways. So great question. Thank you.
No, thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that pretty much wraps up anything I was thinking of sharing today. We could get in deeper, but I feel like that would require a couple more hours and a more intensive workshop. I could show you how to do some loops of sounds. Oh, and another way I was just thinking, since that's such a great question earlier, another way that I often do is I have different pedals that I use for sound making. I have a microphone and a pedal set, etc. Often what I'll do is I'll actually take and use my phone. I've recorded different landscape sounds and I'll use it as field recordings, and I'll put it on top of my microphone and include those into the loop in the sound as well. So again, you can kind of do it different ways, but I feel like any way that you can include sound in your practice, yeah, will make your practice stronger. So yeah, so thank you. My beautiful and intimate audience, thank you.